Number 10. Phage. Phage first appeared in Venom Lethal Protector number 4, which was a 6-issue miniseries from 1993, but he wasn't named until 2012 in Carnage USA number 2. Phage is one of 5 symbiotes forcefully bred out of Venom. The siblings are Agony, Riot, Lasher, and Scream. The Phage would later combine with 3 of its siblings, Riot, Lasher, and Agony, to form the better known Hybrid symbiote. So from then on we're dealing with Hybrid and Hybrid's bondings. This all came about because of the success of the first Venom offspring, Carnage, and while people always want to repeat success. However, few of the symbiote offshoots have proved as popular or long-lasting as Carnage. Carnage first debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man number 361 in 1992. That was as a full appearance. Like Venom before him, he had had a cameo appearance the issue prior. And also like Venom before him, his host, Cletus Cassidy, had been pre-established. All factors on top of his design and absolute bloodlust that made him much more memorable of a character than Phage to most. Still, Marvel has been riding the more and more symbiotes ride ever since. And just look at what they've got Kate's doing with absolute carnage. Number 9. Ruin Venom. Runes, depends how you want to say it. This symbiote comes to us from Ruin vs. Venom number 1 in 1995, and has direct connection to Planet of the Symbiotes, which was a 5-issue event from 1995, and actually had to do with the fallout over the creation of the 5 forcefully bred symbiotes we just talked about. Also, the planet in question is Earth, don't get excited. Ruins is a murder mystery, which I'm about to ruin, so heads up. Ruin Venom involves a symbiote that survived the seeming death of all invading symbiotes from the planet arc, and bonds to Ruin. So, who is Ruin? Well, Ruin was an extreme vampire-like creature created in the 90s who debuted in Sludge number 1. He begins framing Venom for murders around town by writing Venom in huge letters next to the victim. Copying Carnage much? Of course the media falls for it. However, Ruin Venom runs into some problems, not only when real Venom comes to investigate, but also when Ruin begins to suspect some of his actions are being influenced. Ruin.
Up next to number 8, one of my personal favorites, Batman's plot armor. Alright, hear us out on this one, my friends. Batman has this uncanny ability to always manage to defeat foes who, objectively speaking, could straight up murder him 5 times over. This is because the Caped Crusader is always prepared. It's like his shtick. And it's his plot armor. Plot armor is a term that refers to a character's unusual ability to survive infinite damage due to their importance to the story. And who isn't more important than Batman? I mean, sure, you could argue Superman, but hey, the duo are pretty darn special and arguably the most iconic superheroes of all time. Anywho, just take a look at Batman's history and it's easy to see this happen. Hell, look at the Tower of Babel's story. Batman, being the paranoid and hyper-intelligent individual he is, literally came up with a plan to stop every single superpowered peer of his on the Justice League team, just in case one of them lost their shit and turned bad. I mean, in the long run, it was a good plan, but still, he's obsessive. And he's also rarely outdone because of that. He's arguably one of the only heroes who are a match for the Man of Steel, despite, not having any superpowers whatsoever. Money and brains don't technically count as a superpower, friends.
Number 7. ZZZXX. Yes, I said Z. It's Canada up here. This is a more recent addition who debuted in X-Men Kingbreaker number 2 in 2009. This symbiote is a Clintar and a mutant, and it eats brains. It was discovered by the Shi'ar. The most interesting thing about this symbiote, aside from its rather random letter-centric name, is how it was weaponized against the Charles Xavier from the Cancerverse, which was a realm introduced in the Realm of Kings crossover comic 2010, a universe ruled by evil organic masses. So the Xavier in this universe was a planet-sized brain, and for a brain eater like ZZZXX, a match made in heaven. This could really have hit the zombie element harder with the symbiote, but I mean, they have Marvel Zombies for that. Number 6. Mania. Mania first debuted in Venom number 1 in 2003. This symbiote is a clone of Venom, which, given Marvel's history with dragging out perfectly good clone sagas until the entire creative staff behind them is permanently traumatized, I'm amazed a direct clone like this hadn't happened sooner. Also, it was only named Mania in 2011 when Venom relaunched. So this clone was created using a piece of Venom's tongue, which is hardly surprising. That tongue is everywhere. From the start, the symbiote was sadistic, refusing to bond with awkward hosts, instead torturing and killing them, sometimes by pulling up the worst fears from their memories and then acting on those. The thing with Mania is that it's hard to track, because a bunch of things that happen, such as it being reabsorbed into Eddie's symbiote, are no longer considered canon. Now, Mania is just kind of around and brought out when necessary, but since Kate's and the ridiculous amount of symbiotes he's been creating, we'll see how some of these other symbiotes fare. Number 5. Endosim armor. This first debuted in the Superior Iron Man #1 in 2014. So in 2014, Marvel had an event called Axis, which many do not remember too fondly. Cliff notes: Avengers and X-Men versus the Red Skull controlling Xavier and Onslaught. After all of this, Tony's personality was flipped, so now he was Dark Tony. And so he created the Armor Mark 50, a smart liquid metal mesh incorporating symbiote elements. What could go wrong? Also, I can't hear liquid metal without thinking about Terminator 2. It's actually kinda sad. This was a mindless artificial symbiote that was entirely controlled via artificial intelligence, and then cast aside when Tony's personality flipped back. Superior Iron Man was an interesting time. 100% it just existed because of how well Superior Spider-Man had done. But you know, that one had stakes. Shots fired, I'm sorry. I actually have a soft spot for the aesthetic of this armor. Number 4, the Silver Agent. Astro City, that's right, Astro City time. I love Astro City and we don't talk about it enough. I will make all of the reaches to get characters on it on this list. So Astro City parallels the different eras in the mainstream superhero development, like actually historically. So the Silver Agent is their big Silver Age patriotic hero. And okay, so Astro City isn't told in order. Instead, it jumps around to different tales from Astro City's history. So the Silver Agent's tales revealed in bits and pieces. So at the start, we know that he was a hero and that the city has a monument to him, as what happened to him is their greatest shame. So the Silver Agent's story involves time travel, and he is traveling back through his own timeline, and each time he gets a little bit more powerful. So to the city, he appears magical and to just be ever increasing in strength, but really he is being charged by the time travel energy as he moves back and forward further and further. He gains super strength, flight, and more, and with his heroic nature he couldn't not jump in to stop situations he saw unfolding. However, the Silver Agent actually gifted his energy to the city when he returned to be executed for a crime he didn't commit, something only revealed after his death, hence their great shame. Astro City is just a ride. Like how the Samaritan has fought his enemy the Infernal to such a standstill that they just go to dinner once a year to see if either is close to coming over to the other side. I could talk about this all day. Number 3, Spider-Man India. So Spider-Man India was a miniseries that lasted 4 issues in between 2004 and 5, and blended elements of Spider-Man mythos with more mythological elements. The concept was conceived by an Indian director who had met with Stan Lee to discuss creating an Indian superhero. Symbiotes in this universe are demons, fanged, tusked demons who once ruled but were captured in an amulet. When the amulet was found, it turned the host into the Green Goblin. The demon would hop from the Green Goblin to Spider-Man, but be expelled, but before this it is called Venom. The amulet is destroyed, but not Venom. He's always a menace, no matter the earth. Number 2, the Beyonder. For this version, we have to go to yet another one of Marvel's humor issues. These issues have brought us such gems as What If Black Panther Was White? Now I give you the Beyonder. Just let the pun wash over you. Live in it. Be the pun. This comes to us from the What the ? A self-parodying comic series for silly jokes. Its tagline was, the Marvel mag of mirth and mayhem. The Beyonder is this universe's version of the Beyonder, who gives Spider-Ham a version of the black uniform. But it's not a symbiote. I just want to tell you about the Beyonder. It's fun to say for me, but it's probably not fun for you to listen to. Number 1, Scorn. Scorn first debuted in Carnage #5 in 2011. So Scorn was created out of a piece of Carnage left in space after Carnage was torn in half by the Sentry, but he got better. The Sentry may be one of the most powerful beings out there, but Carnage has plot armor and sells comics, so take that, Sentry. The pieces are collected to attempt to create prosthetic limbs, so the first thing that the symbiote bonds to is a prosthetic arm. Because of this, Scorn can bond to technology. Now this is an element that some find confusing, and also there are other story elements that make Scorn a bit convoluted. Things like how Cassidy was alive and had been preserved by Carnage and was repaired by these prosthetics. Again, you can't kill Carnage. Scorn was eventually corrupted by Null, the symbiote god, and started a cult to worship him. She was killed by Carnage after offering herself to him. Absolute carnage. There is so much carnage going on right now. So those were some more obscure symbiotes. I gave myself some caveats. No Venom, no Carnage, no Riot. I wanted some that maybe people might not recognize. Especially if you're not up to date on your symbiote history and if you missed the 90s when so much of this happened. I hope this was a gateway and maybe gave you some stuff to check out. Or to avoid, who knows?
So number 10, we've got Scarlet Witch. Now, okay, yes, I know some of you guys out there in the real world, you're gonna defend her and you're gonna say, hey, I know her powers, it's great, that's fantastic. So, let's get a little bit of a backstory here. So the first time we saw her was in 1964 in X-Men #4. She had many appearances in comics over the years, and actually, when she first appeared, her first real big problem was that she didn't have really defined powers. That's right. Her powers initially were called hex powers, and she could just basically do anything and could cause random events to just happen. She pretty much was a wild card for any tough plot points that the writers had. So some things that she would do is, cause Ultron to short circuit randomly and even cause gas mains to just explode, and it wasn't until Kirk Busiek decided that her powers would be all about manipulating chaos. That's when we got a better picture. But however, that didn't really sit well, because by the time we got to the Avengers Disassembled series, she pretty much had the ability to warp reality. However, most people identify her as having chaos magic being used to her advantage. What is chaos magic? Well, your guess is as good as mine. Number 9, we got Miss Marvel, or Carol Danvers, appearing in 1968. Now, in the past, she has had so many problems. As a matter of fact, today she still has a lot. As a matter of fact, most people identify her as Marvel's version of Superman. Pretty much the female version of that. She's got super strength, stamina, all that sort of stuff. She can fly. Being half human and half Kree gives her a bunch of different abilities, and when she could fly back in the day, the only way she could do it was through a belt device. She also could tap into the energy of a white hole, which is a reverse black hole, which, by the way, has never been identified by man at all in history. This allowed her to control things like gravity, heat, and many other aspects of different spectrums. This also allowed her to survive in the vacuum of space, and she can fly 6 times the speed of sound, and yes, she can explode energy out of her hands, fingertips, all that sort of stuff. And apparently, she also has the ability of 7th sense.
Moving on to number 8, Husk. Many people might assume that Husk has shape-shifting abilities, but that is not the case. The character, who first appeared in ROM Annual Issue 3 in 1984, has the ability to remove one layer of skin, or husk if you will, which then reveals a different layer of skin made out of an entirely different composition. So essentially, she sheds one layer of skin, and the layer of epidermis beneath can be something the likes of metal or stone or something entirely different. She's a metamorph who has made her skin into glass, wood, rubber, diamond, granite, brick, and even adamantium in the past. This can increase her weight, strength, or invulnerability in the process depending on the material. So she becomes diamond, she becomes impervious to an extent. Rubber, she gets bouncy. She even once generated heat and flame, and has even produced acidic skin. Now, aside from being kinda gross, think of like all that dead skin she sheds, it's easy to see why some would mistake Husk for a shapeshifter. Although, technically speaking, she kind of is, but it's a weird process in which she does it, and very limited. Can just be her skin.
Number 7, you got Black Knight, or Dane Whitman. Now, an older Avenger dating back to around 1967. He's actually the descendant of the original Black Knight comics. He gets his powers mainly from his magic sword. He became the Black Knight after he got his famous winged horse Aragorn. Now, he joined the Avengers to defeat Kang the Conqueror originally. He didn't really have any superpowers to begin with. This all changed, however, after he bonded with his teammate Circe. This was after she was injured and his fellow Eternal named Icarus attempted to stabilize her by merging the two together. He's apparently a good swordsman and can hold up against Captain America, and he's a bit of a scientist, understands genetic engineering. His powers might not be a mystery, but he definitely is. Number 6, we got Vision. Okay, yeah, we've all seen him. We all know basically he is a robot. Some people identify him more or less as a human being, but is made out of, synthetic materials. Okay. Now, what's different about him from the movies is in the comics, he's got a solar jewel on top which absorbs solar energy, which can actually also discharge energy at any time. He also can fire beams of microwaves and infrared radiation. Very helpful to know. On top of that, he can also become extremely massive. This is confusing because apparently he does this by harnessing the power from some unknown dimension. This also makes him change in density. Being an android means he has super strength and all the other great attributes that other heroes have. As of recent comics, he can also split himself into smaller parts and change shape, but that's good old-fashioned nanotechnology at its best. Number 5, we got Mantis, probably my least favorite hero that I've ever seen brought to the screen. She's been around since 1973, so you gotta give her some credit there. Her origin, though, is completely unknown. Literally, she talks about herself in third person, person, and she says this one came from a place she must not name to reach a place no man must know. So I guess, you don't really know where she's from. She also trained in martial arts, boom bam, that's good, and she apparently can even, or at least almost beat Captain America. Her biggest and strongest power is obviously using psychic empathy, which means she can feel other people's emotions, man. Basically, she's Deanna Troi from Star Trek. This allows her to figure out also a person's weak spot where she can immediately, boom, knock them out. She's apparently really strong, and with that, she's never ever, well, only once has she ever lost in a hand-to-hand combat situation. On top of that, she has the ability to meditate and heal herself. In some series, she can even sense the future.
Number 4. Magic Venom. Getting real recent now. Magic Venom debuted in Venom Volume 4 number 13 in 2019, and has ties to the War of the Realms event. The one that people on the outside like to make fun of because the lead villain is Malekith, the dark elf from Thor 2 The Dark World. Well, he was from elsewhere first, but that's where many know him from now. And there's been this odd campaign to make Thor 2 relevant again. It's been very interesting. War of the Realms actually starts with him already having conquered all the other realms, so you're stuck in the lamest one. This one, Midgard, Earth. Again, I live here. Give me Alfheim or Valheim, somewhere else. Anyways, everyone has to band together and stop him. In this arc, Eddie and Venom are separated, so he is given a dream stone by a dark elf who is hoping to recruit him. The dream stone acts as an artificial symbiote, but is a mindless one, and Eddie ultimately uses pieces of the suit to save civilians.
Number 3, we've got Moonlight, that appeared in Werewolf by Night number 32. That was hard to say. 1975. Mark Spector is his alter ego. He is human. He's got a lot of similarities between him and Batman. Started off as a boxer, a costumed hero. However, he got his superpowers after he visited an Egyptian moon god. And yes, that means he gets a certain amount of strength depending on the phase of the moon. Apparently, at one point he even lost his powers because he was disobedient. Yo, you bad, Moonlight. You said and now you're done. I don't know what that means. It's also been said that Moonlight has multiple personalities which make him immune to psychic attacks. He also uses what is known as carbondanium armor, which, yes, is not a real armor. This allows him to lock joints and so he can lift more. On top of that, he can jump out of his armor and use it to hold buildings from falling over, which he's done in the past, and then he's fought villains in his underwear. Oh yeah. Does not fly anywhere. He has the mooncopter, kind of like the bat plane. I don't know why Marvel has not got sued for that. Number 2, you got Novar, a rather new superhero debuting in the year 2000 for Marvel Boy number 1. Now he is part Kree, part cockroach. That's right. He's also a part of the Dark Avengers. Now because he is half Kree and he has insect DNA, he's got a lot of strength, agility, stamina, that sort of thing. Not as appealing as Spider-Man though. Nobody really wants to hang out with a cockroach. What his power is he can also control his neurological impulses, so he can remove himself from feeling any sort of pain. He can also suppress his emotions, which can hinder him from winning a battle. This is simply known as Whiterun, where he removes anything from his thoughts. So basically that cute girl that's in the red dress while he's fighting Thanos, well, that girl ain't getting hit on at all. Also, Novar's salvia can infect people. I mean, like, he's a bug. He can scale walls and get into small places because he's triple jointed. And yes, like a bug, he can digest almost anything, which can repair himself. And like most superheroes, he knows science pretty well, which for this guy, he helped develop interdimensional travel. I don't know how you do that. But number 1, probably the worst of them all, is 3D Man. Oh god. Debuted in 1977 and should have stayed there. Basically the story is Chuck Chandler was captured by the Skrull invaders and he got turned into a 2-dimensional being. However, his brother Hal ended up putting on these glasses and could see his brother, and if he concentrated hard enough, boom, Chuck materialized into a 3-dimensional weird being. Basically done obviously through the advancement of radiation, of course. But the thing is, apparently when Hal puts on the glasses, it renders him unconscious, and of course, 3D Man goes to fight the world. 3D Man also has superhero strength, and you know what? I'm just done. That has got to be the most ridiculous one of them all. That's the icing on the cake.
And at number 10, interdimensional travel, The Flash. Complex powers, yay! The Flash's second iteration in the form of Silver Age baby Barry Allen tends to take the laws of science and just twist them, making them arguably inconceivable in our real world, but really neat to see on the panels of DC's comics. Of course, that lends itself to be a tad confounding. Such is the Flash's interdimensional travel powers. Now, according to the comics, the Flash can vibrate his body at a molecular level, which allows him to transfer himself between dimensions. Now, initially this was something that could only be achieved by his cosmic treadmill, but in later years he gained the ability to do this himself by increasing the intensity and speed of his vibrations. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, adjusting those two factors acts as a means for a lot of the things that Barry can do, but more on that in a bit. Up next, number 9, talking to fish. Aquaman, of course. While Aquaman's ability to communicate with aquatic life has long been the butt of many jokes aimed at the DC's King of Atlantis, there's actually been some major retconning over the years when it comes to the scope of this ability and how it's defined, and just in general how people understand it. It's not just like chatting with a fish. For example, in the New 52, in the first issue of Aquaman, Arthur Curry is chilling at a restaurant when he's mildly harassed by other customers there, who make a point of saying that everyone knows Aquaman talks to fish. Arthur does not hesitate to clear this up, noting that, I quote, "Fish don't talk. Their brains are too primitive to carry on a conversation. I reach into their midbrains and telepathically push them to help me out. Squids, sharks, eels, it's all the same, though dolphins are another story." Now, many of the jokes surrounding Aquaman, primarily spawned from the Super Friends cartoon of the past, were dealt with head-on by Jeff Johns in this series, and it was actually a pretty solid start to the Aquatic Heroes New 52 comic. Now let's flash forward though to the Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth Special 1 and Justice League issue 11, more recent Rebirth comics. DC started exploring grander concepts here. And similar to Barry Allen's Speed Force connection, Arthur Curry has a connection to something called Life Force, which apparently, according to Scott Snyder, could suggest that Aquaman might have the ability to communicate with all life. And yes, that is still pretty confusing, especially when DC has noted that they haven't changed Aquaman's powers, but rather just want to expand the meaning of them. Right. But hey, he doesn't talk to fish one-on-one, so there you go. That solves that question. Just leave it as the New 52 explanation. I'm sure people will be fine with that.
And at number 8, Ambush Bug. First appearing in DC Comics Presents number 52, Ambush Bug was initially presented as a villain to Superman and the Doom Patrol. He appeared as a self-centered villain who wore a skin-tight green suit, which made him look more or less like a bug. Any and all powers he had were just devices he had hidden away in his suit somewhere. Ambush Bug was so popular, however, that he was brought back more and more until eventually they transitioned him from being a villain into a third-wall-breaking hero, very akin to Deadpool. His appearances in comics nowadays are very sporadic and get weirder and weirder every time, and his powers are pretty much whatever the writers want them to be.
Moving on to number 7, the electromagnetic spectrum vision from Martian Manhunter. Similar to our previous Flash number, here we have a sophisticated ability that occasionally goes over some readers' heads, and hey, not criticizing with that. Scientific logic in comic books is very different than the laws reality follows, as we mentioned earlier. Martian Manhunter, who will be making another appearance on this list a little later on, is a complex character. Yes, he is a green Martian from Mars, but he also is a being who has a plethora of powers, some of which are a little difficult to wrap your head around. Ja'on Jones is capable of seeing across the electromagnetic spectrum. What on earth does that entail? So, you know how Superman has that nifty X-ray vision of his? Now think of this power as a ridiculously amped up version of that. Nicknamed Martian Vision, it allows Ja'on to not only use X-ray vision but to see infrared, ultraviolet, and microwave wavelengths. While we don't entirely know how this is visually represented to the Martian, since there's yet to be a proper POV panel featuring this in DC Comics, or at least that we know of, let us know if we're wrong in the comments. But we can imagine that it would share some similarities to how the Predators in Predators see other kinds of heat signatures or wavelengths, so hey. Speaking of characters with vast skill sets, that brings us to our next number. And at number 6, Shazam, and like all of his powers. Shazam is one of those characters whose befuddling history often leads to those less familiar with the hero getting confused with the full range of his powers, and also getting him confused with Marvel's Captain Marvel. But like, there is reason to get confused. So for starters, if you are unaware, Shazam used to be called Captain Marvel back when the character was owned by Fawcett Comics, the original publisher who created Billy Batson back in the Golden Age. Back then, he would say the word Shazam and he would be transformed from a boy to a grown man with superpowers. That still remains the same. DC though would eventually buy out the rights to Fawcett properties after DC basically sued them for the character being too similar to Superman. Fawcett essentially went bankrupt. It's actually pretty tragic. Now by that time, Marvel had already published their Captain Marvel, so DC changed the character's name to Shazam moving forward so there wouldn't be any confusion and more lawsuits. If that wasn't confusing enough, let's take a look at the abilities that Shazam has. And also just to clear this up, when he says Shazam, the magic word, that is also the name of the wizard who gave Billy his powers, but it's also an acronym for what his powers do. Shazam is made up of the names and abilities of 6 immortal elders. First there's Solomon, who gives him his wisdom. Then there's Hercules, who gives him his strength. Atlas, who is stamina and invulnerability. Zeus, which gives him immortality, electricity generation and manipulation, power over lightning, and basically all things electric. Next up is Achilles, who gives him his willpower and superhuman durability. And courage. And lastly Mercury, who gives him his speed and flying abilities. All in all, there is a lot going on there, and it's a lot more detailed than what we just went through. It would be easy to see how some of those abilities could be confusing to some, especially when there is that common belief that Shazam is basically just Superman but goofier, which he kind of is, to be fair. And at number 5, Green Lantern's ability to create kryptonite. Green Lantern's ring can do a whole lot of stuff aside from creating light constructs. It can store a whole lot of crap, including a whole planet, which is kind of insane. But that's not the ring's ability that we're focusing on today, despite how silly that may seem to some. In 1999's Superman Man of Tomorrow issue 13, Green Lantern busts out a brand new trick that seems like a Deus Ex Machina of sorts. Superman was on a rampage, and Martian Manhunter was like, yo, I'm gonna use my telepathy to read the formula for kryptonite from Superman's mind. Yes, just keep following me here, friends. Then he sent that formula to Green Lantern Kyle Rayner to duplicate as a means of fighting the Man of Steel. Supes managed to evade the attack, but it still felt a little extra, almost devaluing the rarity of kryptonite as an organic material. I mean, if Green Lanterns can just create it, Superman would pretty much be dead if that got into the wrong hands. Just saying. It makes no sense.
Number 4, we got Star Fox, and I'm not talking about the good Star Fox, I'm talking about this Star Fox from Marvel. Part of the Eternals group, he appeared first in 1973. Basically, he ages really slowly because he uses cosmic energy. This also makes him extremely hard to hurt because the energy protects him from falls and impacts and other things like that. However, bullets and knives can hurt him, and not just emotionally. However, Star Fox in some series has been able to manipulate gravity using psychokinesis. He also knows apparently 500 alien languages. But his most important power of all is he is capable of activating the pleasure area of enemies' brains, which pretty much helps them calm down so he can win the battle. So I guess you could say, sexiness is his power. Yeah.
And at number 3, Kryptonian Coma, talking Superman. Oh, the death of Superman, my absolute favorite story arc ever. That was sarcasm, people, in case you did not pick up on the obvious. Fans of this channel know I have major beef with this arc. Every time it comes up in a video, I go on a tangent about how terrible it was, how it pretty much ruined the concept of death in mainstream comics, and how it was all just a big sham for DC to pull in a bunch of extra dollars. Long story short, and skipping over some of the hilariously bad and nonsensical plot points here, Doomsday comes to Earth. He and Superman engage in what can only be called a punching match to see who can punch harder. They punch each other so hard that they punch each other to death at the same time. And both are believed to be dead, but turns out, surprise, neither is. The problem is, a whole long and painfully tedious story event was drawn out of Superman's death, in which a bunch of dollar store Superman replacements showed up, and a side story where Green Lantern turned homicidal was a thing. He was merely in a Kryptonian coma, which apparently makes it look like he's dead with no pulse, no breathing, the whole shabam. So everyone in the story was like, whoa, Superman, thank God you're not actually dead, you pulled a fast one on us with that power of yours that makes 0 sense, but okay. Perhaps this number is more baffling than confusing, being something that felt so far-fetched rather than a reasonable plot point. It's all about that money grab. Moving on to number 2, quantum tunneling. We're talking the Flash here, friends. Quantum tunneling is just a fancy name for phasing. It is the Flash's ability to vibrate at such a high speed and at such a high intensity that he can pass through solid objects. See what I mean about those two things being a factor in a bunch of his powers? And here's where it gets real fun and bewildering. In the New 52 and Flash issue 3, Flash depicts the ability to transfer his quantum tunneling to objects that he touches. He phases a whole airplane through a bridge. Scientifically, we're not even going to try to explain how that is possible. We just know that he becomes practically invisible, and in order for this to work, he needs to calculate the frequency of his vibrations, or else it could get real messy, like phasing through an object halfway and then, getting dead. It's also a power that has varied amongst different iterations of the Flash, with Barry Allen seemingly having a better grasp over it than Wally West. And finally, in our number 1 spot, the 9 senses of Martian Manhunter. Human beings have 5 senses. Martian Manhunter? Well, he's got 9 of them. Aside from being a concept that is strenuous to comprehend, we can't help but be slightly perplexed by what on Earth, or Mars rather, all of those senses possibly do. It almost seems like a completely made up ability that DC just threw into the character's skill set for the fun of it. So out of the 9, 5 are the human senses that we have, but the extra 4 have never fully been defined in the comics. There is a fan theory that one of his 9 senses is a precognitive one. In Martian Manhunter's early days, the character exhibited precognitive abilities. Regardless, John's 9 senses tops our list simply because there is no possible way for us to understand them, simply because they've never really been explained to us. And also, humans can probably better sympathize with 5 senses than a whole extra 4 that we don't have. All we can really do is speculate. We know that Martian vision isn't considered to be one of them, and thanks to JLA Year 1 Issue 6, we know that if his eyes were removed, he would still have the other 8 senses, meaning the additional 4 have nothing to do with vision. But thanks to Jack Kirby, there is reason to believe that those 4 senses are chopped up to abilities that he was shown as having in Detective Comics issue 226, in his second appearance ever. Those include telepathy, telekinesis, empathetic precognition, and molecular hypnosis, although those tend to be listed as separate powers of his these days compared to being one of the 9 senses. So all in all, a little confusing. Oh boy.
Starting off at number 10, we have Magic, or Ilyana Rasputin, named after a really bad Russian guy. Not really. She first appeared in 1975 in the Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. Now, she originated from Lake Baikal, Russia, which, on a side note, by the way, is one of the oldest, most clearest lakes in the entire world. It's also one of the deepest lakes. It's the 7th largest lake in the world. Okay, a little bit of a side fact there, I kinda like that sort of stuff. Let's get back to Magic. Now Magic, she was taken to the United States of America by a villain known as Arcade. Eventually though, she was rescued and became a glorious member of the X-Men, but her powers consisted of teleportation, where she brings out these little stepping discs which originate from a dimension known as Limbo. Now she's capable of teleporting not just in small regions but across continents, and she can even teleport through space and time. Crazy, I know, which others cannot do. She also has the ability to form her own armor, which when she uses her magic more from the Limbo universe, it just gets stronger. And that's what makes people wonder, is exactly what this universe is and how does she manage to harness this energy? It's really unknown. However, she's a sorceress of the Limbo universe, and that's all we got. As a matter of fact, she ended up absorbing all of the Limbo universe, which pretty much nowadays when she teleports, weird images of ghosts and dragons and other creatures now appear. I have no idea. It's comic books. Number 9, we've got Michael Pointer, or simply known as Omega. He's actually got a few different names as well, I'll get into that. Now originally he was just a simple postman before he found out that he was a mutant. He's capable of not just absorbing people and mutants for their powers, but he can also take on personalities, that's right. His powers have always been extremely strong that his suit had to be made by Reed Richards so he could regulate his powers. There was also a point in his superhero career where he absorbed the power of 50 mutants and Zorn. Zorn merged with Michael Pointer and ended up killing almost all the members of Alpha Flight. The thing with Michael Pointer is that he does not need to touch mutants to take the power, he could just be right near them. It's kinda silly. And he actually managed to almost take all of the powers from every single mutant on Earth. He's kinda like Superman of absorption, an unstoppable machine with his powers having unknown origins. Yep. I could write for comic books.
Number 8, Jack Hawksmoor. He is a member of the Authority. This is a Justice League-esque team published by Wildstorm Comics, featuring the characters from Stormwatch. Most people know it because Apollo, the Superman pastiche, and the Midnighter, the Batman pastiche, were married. Yes, I said were. People think of other things too, but this comes up a lot. You know it's true. Okay, so Jack Hawksmoor. He debuted in Stormwatch number 37 back in 1996, and has been in the Authority since issue 1. And he can't survive outside of an urban environment. So no trips to the country for him. When in the city, he has superpowers that are tied to the city. These include super strength and agility, just like a city. Telepathic control, and he can animate objects in the city, like the buildings. This varies a little bit from city to city, and Jack acts like each city is a unique entity, which no way they are. City doesn't feel like a word to me anymore. He one time turned a city into a battle suit for him to wear. He also doesn't need to eat because he converts air pollution into sustenance, so he must be doing great. He can transport between cities in a mini womb thing. What's the confusing part here is, why does the city do this to him? He was modified by humans from the 70th century, which caused him to have these powers. You have a lot of freedom with this. You can do some zany things based on the cities he's in. My plan is just to go into a field in the middle of nowhere and stand there. He's done. These modifications were made to him so he could fight a threat from the future. A city-based threat, clearly.
Number 7, we got Glob Herman. Now the coolest guy, but the lamest name at the same time. First appeared in what was known as the New X-Men Volume 2, 138. The Prime of Miss Emma Frost, May 2013 issue. Now this guy is made up of essentially living wax. It's known as bioparaffin, and his internal organs are pretty much viewable. You can see it, so you can see his bones. They float inside. It's really cool. Now bioparaffin apparently reacts to heat extremely well, and what we do know that this stuff gives him great strength, and at one point he acted as a major heat shield for the X-Men Academy class when they transported to Sword Base. At one point he joined fellow classmates in the Omega game. Glob ended up attacking civilians and joined in the fight against the X-Men. Now the X-Men succeeded in taking him down by burning off that wax layer. He also is known to flick his wax off in small portions, and besides real awesome strength, we don't really know what else it does. Number 6, Shatterstar. I do like the name of this. First appeared in 1991, a part of the New Mutants series. Now, he still remained very popular. As a matter of fact, he was in the second Deadpool movie. He originated from a planet called Mojo World, which was also a century in the future and in another dimension, and I'll get to that and his powers in a short bit. Basically, he's a genetically engineered individual, and he learned to fight in the arenas on Mojo World. Now, for his powers, he has superhero strength, he can time travel, and also dimension travel. Pretty awesome. He also has extreme senses, keeping him alert, and his weapon, which is a staff, is extremely strong. At one point, he was capable of hitting the Thing into a building, which is like, what? I don't know how you do that. Because he was also engineered, his bones are hollow, so he can go really fast. As a matter of fact, he's expected to be able to dodge machine gun fire at point blank range. He's also extremely intelligent and can learn things like languages very quickly. Number 5, we got Gold Balls. Probably the worst name for a hero, but I mean, let's be perfectly honest, it's self-explanatory. He pretty much takes these gold balls that he can just produce and projects them from any part of his body. On top of that, he can call in an infinite amount of them, and like he can not only shoot them in a straight line, but he can also direct them. Pretty weird kind of ability. I mean, magic balls that can also grow in size. Wouldn't the ladies love that? Yeah.
Number 4, The Question. If you've never read a Question comic before, I highly recommend it. This guy is one of my favorite all-time DC heroes, and he does not get enough love around here. Whether it be Vic Sage or Renee Montoya wearing the non-face of The Question, you're going to have an awesome time reading any issue. However, the abomination we got from the New 52 still hurts me deep in my soul. This Question was a man who committed a crime so horrible that the most powerful wizards in existence removed his face, wiped his memory, threw him into the 21st century, and damned him to forever speak in questions. It was so bad, it was retconned a few years later, but still, like, never touch this garbage. Regardless, this version of Vic Sage somehow gained amazing detective skills and became a master of disguise. I guess the wizards who cursed him in the first place didn't want him to be completely useless.
Number 3, Forge, a man of great technology, and not just good at inventing things, but he can also perceive mechanical energy in action, which basically means he can look at something and go, ah, that's how you use it. Pretty much he's a guy that just went to Harvard University for engineering and walked out and said, yep, I'm smart. Actually, to be perfectly honest, it's not realistically through intelligence, more or less like technological instinct. Sometimes he'll make something or figure something out and he doesn't really know why, and then he has to go back and he's like, oh, that's how I did it. On top of that, he's also a user of magic. He uses Native American magic, but simple, he's just like an Iron Man, just different. Number 2, you've got Dazzler. Now she is one of the weirdest. I mean, I don't understand any of her powers. I don't know if she's still being made, but either way, apparently she can transduce sonic vibrations. She uses a range of frequencies, she uses the audible spectrum, and uses sound pressure levels. What does that mean? Well, apparently she uses sound and music because music is very pleasing to her. Yeah, that's right. She uses this energy to create light waves that can either put like a trance effect on her enemies. She can also blind her enemies. She is incapable of being blinded, and she also can create holograms and convert this energy to fly. How she does this, nobody really knows. Basically, it's a lot of BS, but it was probably designed by a music student. Number 1, we've got Rogue. I know a lot of you guys are gonna go, come on, really? But realistically, for me, I don't really understand Rogue. I mean, you guys already know a lot about Rogue, so I'm not going to get into the details of her, but we really don't understand her, powers to a degree. And one of the biggest problems is that she's had a different amount of abilities through time, and that's what gets really conflicting. Now, we all know that she has the ability to absorb other people's powers and other mutants' powers, so basically that means no kissy kissy for her. Thank you. However, in some cases, she can also not just absorb their powers, but their memories, their personalities. Apparently, she can duplicate herself into her victims. So I'm like, yeah, I feel like she's just the vampire of mutants, At one point, she got so powerful she could do an instant death touch. After the Messiah complex, she had the ability to control her powers, so yeah, she could get it on and not kill somebody. It's great. She also apparently, absorbed Miss Marvel's powers at one point, and even Wonder Man's powers, which she had a problem doing that in the past. But one thing is, when she absorbs the powers, her victims are sometimes unconscious for a while, and yeah, how she gets her powers, we don't really know.
And at number 10, Mogo. Hailing from the DC universe, Mogo is a sentient planet adrift in space, doing his best to look awesome and not do much else. Oh, and did I mention that he's also a part of the Green Lantern Corps? The Green Lanterns will literally hire anybody these days, even an immovable planet. Aside from being able to create constructs with his power ring, Mogo is also able to create holograms on his surface to simulate whatever he wants. How is this explained? Well, he's a giant superpowered planet who's also a space cop. Does it need any more explanation than that? And at number 9, Big Bertha. Ashley Crawford is a mutant who is able to control the fat distribution throughout her entire body. So during the day, she's one of the most beautiful supermodels the world has ever seen. But when trouble arises, she becomes Big Bertha, a really fat superhero with super strength. Now, I understand the concept of being able to redistribute your body mass to make yourself bulkier and, more or less an immovable object, but where does the super strength come in? How does adding more mass onto her legs allow her to jump further, like it does in the comics? Wouldn't it be the opposite? Her powers are strictly defined as fat manipulation, so muscle shouldn't be involved in this at all. I'm so confused, Marvel. Why would you do this? Is she just like the female Blob? I need to know.
Number 8. Kroba. Kroba first debuted in Venom Seed of Darkness number 1 in 1997. Are you picking up on just how much Venom stuff was going on in the 90s? There was no escape. If you didn't like Venom, Godspeed. Side note, Kroba's heading on the cover is The Living Darkness, and inside the book, he's called The Abyss That Walked. Pretty neat. So this is supposed to be a story that occurs before the current timeline, well, the then current timeline. Marvel will do this sometimes when they have a tale that really won't slot anywhere but isn't strong enough for a what if, or they're going through a period where they're not publishing what ifs. It's a pretty simple story. Kroba bonds with a scientist, Dr. Don Levy. It tells him that it will help maintain knowledge, the usual, but it tricks him. It's up to Eddie Brock to defeat him. I'm kidding, Eddie isn't Venom. In this story, he's still a not as good as Peter Parker photographer, so he observes and ponders on the nature of man and monster. This one is less hard to understand and more easy to miss.
Number 7. Hope Summers. Hope Summers is one of the most powerful mutants in all the 616 universe. Or is it the Prime universe now? I can never tell anymore. Hope was born at a time when no new mutants were supposed to emerge and unleashed a psionic blast so powerful it destroyed Cerebro. Was this psionic blast explained? Not really, but let's move on. It was later explained that Hope has the ability to mimic the abilities of mutants in her general vicinity, and is also able to boost the abilities of those around her. Mimicry is a pretty straightforward ability, right? So where does all this other stuff come from? Like, remember the time when she cured Rogue of the uncurable Strain 88 virus? Or remember when Rogue's touch could kill anyone, but it didn't kill Hope, she could just carry her around normally? And she's also undetectable by Cerebro, so is she even a mutant? I don't even know anymore. And at number 6, Deadman. Boston Brand was one of the greatest trapeze artists of all time and would captivate audiences under his stage name, Deadman. Unfortunately, during one of his routines, Boston was murdered and then resurrected as a ghost with the powers of possession. Using these powers, Boston, now only referring to himself as Deadman, attempts to solve the mystery of his own murder. Now, see, I love Deadman. I think he's a very unique character, and the stories he's involved with are really cool. However, sometimes his general power of possession gets a little muddled. As a ghost, he should be able to jump into whoever he wants, right? But no, he has a lot of restrictions. If somebody is already being mind controlled, no. Has magical power, no. Or someone who has a really strong will, no. So why does this happen? I know he needs obstacles in order to be a good character, but there's never a definitive reason as to why he can't possess these kinds of people. I mean, like, okay, hear me out. What if he tried really hard? Like, harder than he's ever tried before? Like, would it work? I don't know, you gotta tell me, DC. And at number 5, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers used to have a pretty refined power set. Her body was altered after an explosion caused her DNA to be spliced with that of Kree alien DNA and Mar-Vell's. Danvers gained superhuman strength, endurance, stamina, and flight, and she became the first Ms. Marvel. She later became binary and gained the ability to absorb energy and then project it in photonic form. As binary, she became one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. But in order to maintain that, she needed a constant stream of energy. What powers does Carol have now that she's Captain Marvel? Well, pretty much whatever the writers want. She can now fly 6 times faster than the speed of sound, can withstand and then absorb the explosion of a nuclear bomb, absorb magic, withstand the pressure of open space without batting an eye. Like, when did this happen? I understand characters evolving and growing over time to become better versions of themselves, but this power level spike happened like almost out of nowhere. And as far as I know, Marvel doesn't have a hyperbolic time chamber.
Number 4, we got Blink. Now, a member of Generation X, also in the film Days of Future Past, which is my favorite X-Men film, if you guys really wanted to know that. Now, she's extremely unstable. Sounds like a lot of mutants these days, but oh well. Now, she has the ability to not just teleport herself, but other people around her, which sometimes seems all too convenient. Now, this ability makes her being able to also teleport objects and other things that she can use against her enemies. As for how she does this, we don't really know.
And at number 3, Slapstick. I hate this character. I hate this character so much. Like, I really don't want to talk about this character. It's that bad. I wish it was Kelly or Sasha, but they left early and forced me to talk about this garbage. So here we go. Slapstick was exposed to a strange alien device that made his body indestructible at the cost of looking like a garish cartoon character that reeks of early 90s. He has the physics of a cartoon character and can be horribly beaten into a pulp, only to spring back up into perfect form. No matter how many times people try and murder him, he just springs back up and manages to beat them somehow. So that's it, I'm done with Slapstick. That point done, we're out. And at number 2, Kid Eternity. Kid Eternity is one of my favorite nonsensical heroes of all time. He has the power to summon any good historical or mythological figure by saying Eternity. So you can imagine his comics get really weird very fast. Kid Eternity was later revised to summon demons in the form of said fictional characters that he calls out into battle and then they fight for him. He is promptly murdered in the opening pages of JSA number 1. Then he came back 7 years later to help the Teen Titans fight Brother Blood to prevent him from gaining access to the Door of Life and Death. I told you, his stories get really weird. And in at number 1, Pre-Crisis Superman. Everyone in the world, regardless of whether or not you enjoy comics, knows who Superman is, right? Superman is an icon, with very straightforward powers, and even more straightforward origin for comics. He's an alien baby who came over from a dying planet and gets his powers from our sun. He's got super speed, super strength, can fly. Basically, he can do all the things you wish you could do as a kid. His powers can get a little ridiculous, you know, with like eye lasers and stuff, but you know, you put it all aside because it's a comic book, it's fun, right? But for the most part, you understand how these work. Now that we have established this, let me tell you that Pre-Crisis Superman does not work that way in the slightest. This guy is on a completely different level from who we know today. He has super strength with no limits and can move whatever he wants, including planets. His flight is unimpeded and has no limits. His supervision allowed him to see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He can hold his breath indefinitely, so he never has to breathe again. His only weaknesses were kryptonite and radiation from the red sun. But aside from that, nothing could hurt him. He literally flew into the core of a star unharmed. However, his best powers include super ventriloquism, super hypnotism, and the ability to wipe someone's mind with a kiss. What was DC's explanation for all these powers? Well, the sun. Yeah, that's it.
And at number 10, Karma. Karma is a character who first appeared in Marvel Team-Up issue 100 back in 1980. She came from Vietnam, having fled the country with her family during the war. She was one of the founding members of the New Mutants. Now Karma has powerful psionic abilities that allow her to physically possess others, meaning she can take possession of the minds of humans or animals. This occurs by Karma projecting a psionic energy surge that overwhelms their consciousness and renders her victim unconscious, with Karma's own mind taking the wheel, so to speak. When Karma is in control, she can do some real damage, having the ability to alter her victim's memories, perceptions, reveal information to her, or have them fall asleep. She can even make their body work as if it were an extension of her own. But if she stays too long with a host, she risks her own personality becoming a subordinate to that host personality, becoming more and more like her victim. After an incursion with the Shadow King, Karma also gained the ability to mentally see through others' eyes, and she can protect herself from the psychic assault of others. Moving on to number 9, Joseph. Joseph, who only operates by a first name, is the clone of Magneto, but kind of sucks in comparison to him. This is why he's a bit baffling to some. He is a mutant clone who first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 327 from 1995, but he also died in a battle against the real Magneto and had a thing for Rogue really briefly. Now his abilities in theory should be the same as Magneto's if he's the iconic villain's clone, right? Well, that is not the case, hence why he's on this list. Sure, he is capable of generating powerful magnetic fields, but he can also generate electricity and electromagnetic radiation. And the real kicker? Well, he doesn't have the full range of Magneto's powers. He never demonstrated the same extent of those powers or some of the tricks that Magneto has been able to pull off over the years, like producing a wormhole. He lacks the mental barriers Magneto has, and therefore when he manipulates a ton of energy, he often causes damage to himself. Sucks for you, Joseph no last name.
Number 8, we got Phantom X, which is probably the coolest name of all of these guys, I'm gonna be honest. Now, he first appeared in 2002 in the new X-Men series number 128, created out of the Weapon Plus program and acted as a super sentinel for a while. The Weapon Plus program made a group of people or mutants with techno-organic organisms being fused with nanotechnology of a sentinel. I don't really know what that means, but Phantom X was born from his mother, who was one of these Weapon Plus made people, when she was fertilized with nano machines. So his powers, they're interesting because he has a nervous system known as the EVA, which can become external, and when the EVA actually leaves him, he becomes more powerful because he doesn't even feel his injuries. Also, the EVA can shapeshift, it identifies as a woman. Phantom X also even has a backup internal nervous system in case EVA gets damaged. Phantom X also has the ability to go into a state of mind and do his own self-repairs. He's an amazing marksman, and his bullets apparently never miss because they are laced with mutant skin. At one point, he was capable of even skewing reality with illusions. Weird.
And at number 7, Sage. Sage is a character who debuted back in 1980, appearing in the X-Men issue 132. And she has a variety of mental abilities that can often be a tad confusing. Think of Sage like a supercomputer. Her brain has unlimited storage capacity. She can recall anything at any time with perfect clarity, and the speed of her thoughts allows her to analyze her surroundings for data within seconds, almost instantaneously. She's like a back computer. In addition to that, she can calculate probability of events based on said data. Sage can multitask too, completing various actions all at once in her brain. And if that wasn't wild enough, she has perfect control over her body because of her superpowered mind, meaning she can recreate any physical actions that she's seen once, as long as they are within the parameters that her body is capable of. She can even see a person's genetic code and read their DNA, and selectively evolve existing genetic traits, which can tap into latent abilities, although she can't reverse the procedure, which has caused unpredictable side effects in the past. She is a walking, talking bat computer. Up next at 6, Lockheed. Lockheed is a literal dragon. Well, actually he is an alien dragon who was Kitty Pryde's longtime companion and a member of both the X-Men and Excalibur teams. First appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 166 from 1983, this little dude does a lot more than just your typical dragon stuff of flying and projecting fire. And he is also the size of a cat, which is kind of super adorable. Lockheed comes from a race of advanced dragon-like extraterrestrials who can travel through space via astral ships that transport their essence, which kinda seems absolutely absurd. Now, because of his empath abilities, he is able to understand human speech despite not being able to speak it all that well, and is immune to telepathic probing. So he's not just a cat-sized dragon after all. Although, I mean, would you rather have a real dragon or a tiny dragon that was cat-sized? Personally, I would go for the cat-sized dragon. much more manageable and like adorable too. And at 5, Revanche. Revanche, who debuted in 1993 in X-Men issue 17, is one of a few characters on this list whose powers are not only confusing, but so is their origin story. So Revanche's early appearances were plagued by continuity errors in Marvel's comics thanks to one of her creators, Fabian Nicieza, failing to read Uncanny X-Men issue 255. In that issue, the character Psylocke is discovered on the shores of an island by the Hand, whereas in issue 22 of the second volume of X-Men, a handful of issues after Revanche's debut, her origin story contradicted the one in Uncanny X-Men, with the character having come to possess Psylocke's body. Confusing, right? Revanche was said to have been an intuitive empath prior to switching bodies with Psylocke, but after switching bodies she gained telepathic abilities and could psionically generate a blade, a Psyblade that she could use to force her way into other telepathic characters' minds. So essentially she is Psylocke but not Psylocke and used to be an empath and is just a big jumble of continuity errors. Yeah, no bueno. And at number 4, Boom Tube creation from Cyborg. For starters, boom tubes are already mildly confusing. Let's begin with that. Boom tubes are an extra-dimensional point-to-point Einstein-Rosen bridge that are typically opened by a mother box and used as a means of transportation primarily by residents of Apocalypse and New Genesis. New God stuff. While often opened by a mother box, there's a handful of heroes out there who are capable of opening themselves, one of which is Cyborg. The New 52 version of Cyborg altered the hero's origin slightly by having parademons invade Star Labs after Victor was converted into his cybernetic self. After arguing with his father about what he had been transformed into, he then chased down a parademon and saved a woman on the street from it. But in the process, he absorbed something from a parademon, boom tube technology, which allowed him to transport himself or other individuals. All in all, it is an ability that kind of felt like it was tacked on, but hey, not gonna complain. Moving on to number 3, Dazzler. Dazzler is often one of the most ripped on mutant characters in the comics, thanks to her publication origins. Initially, Dazzler, aka Alison Blair, was commissioned by Casablanca Records in 1978 as an animated special multimedia cross-promotion called The Disco Queen. Casablanca would bail on the project thanks to financial concerns, but the Disco Queen would live on, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 130 in 1980 as Dazzler. Dazzler's abilities, which are yet another source of her history of mockery, include the power to convert sound into light beams of various forms and intensity. She is also a trained singer, actress, and dancer, and of course is a highly accomplished roller skater. No joke on that last one. Arguably, the sound conversion trick of hers is the most confusing. She takes sonic vibrations which reach her body and transduces them into light. She has a large range of frequencies that she can do this with all kinds of sound pressures regardless of complexity, dissonance, or randomness being changed and converted, meaning a song and the sound of a car skidding could both be converted into light. So, what do these light beams do? This is where it gets even a little bit more baffling. She can temporarily blind people by creating a pulse of light of several thousand watts. She can create a cascade of sparkling lights that messes with people's equilibrium. She can create a strobe effect, which is no good for people who have epilepsy, and she can create rays of light that use patterns to produce trance-like effects in her victims. Dazzler can generate enough ultraviolet light to melt large metal objects. She can even use those light rays to create holograms and has used light energy to generate flight, which I don't quite understand, but that's okay. The more you know. And at number 2, Maggot. Maggot is a character that we've discussed a handful of times on our channel thanks to his absurd abilities. He has a slug-based digestive system. Oh, and he also is psychometric. Now, first appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 345 from 1997, Maggot is a fellow whose digestive system is quite unique. Where his intestines should be, he has a hollow cavity that's home to a pair of semi-sentient slugs, or maggots, hence the name. He's named those slugs Eenie and Meanie. Eenie and Meanie can burrow themselves out of his torso, and at super fast speeds, they attack a foe or object with a powerful enzyme, which then processes and digests said object, or person. From there, they come back to Maggot, crawl back into his hollow cavity, and then transmit the food energy they collected to him, which then can supercharge him and allow him to do a variety of things like increase his strength, physical size, his sturdiness, stamina, etc. If the slugs don't re-enter his belly, this process does not work. And in the past, he's actually lost one of his slugs too. He doesn't get another one. He's left with one slug, which means I guess half of the abilities of digestive power with one slug. And finally, in at number 1, Darwin. Darwin is a peculiar character. First appearing in 2006, X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2, he's a mutant who has reactive evolution powers. When he was first born, his mother practically disowned him because of his abilities, and later he was experimented on by scientists until Moira McTaggart recruited him. So what does reactive evolution mean in Darwin's case? Well, his body automatically adapted to his environment or circumstances, which allows him to survive anything, although the extent of that capability has never been fully defined in the comics. Now in the past, he's gained night vision in the dark, he's grown gills when in water, he became fireproof when his skin was exposed to an open flame. But it's not just basic physical transformations with him. He once converted his entire body into pure energy. He has increased his own intelligence. He morphed into a sponge when he was shot at with a weapon meant to destroy one's nervous system. He has learned different languages by merely looking at them. And when facing off against the Hulk, his body teleported him away from the battle. That last bit is interesting because Darwin doesn't have a choice over how his body reacts. While he may have chosen to increase his strength when fighting against the likes of the Hulk, his body sensed the best means of survival was to teleport him away from the battle. His body is even proven to process alcohol faster when drinking, preventing him from getting drunk. The tough life for Darwin.
Number 10. Dial H. Now this isn't one specific superhero, but rather a comic series featuring a rotary device called the Dial. Though in the most recent 2019 series, it is a phone, a rotary dial phone, that allows the user to access superpowers when they dial Hero, hence Dial H. The title is 100% a play on the Alfred Hitchcock title Dial M for Murder. This series first debuted in the 60s and has had numerous updates since. The first iteration debuted in House of Mystery number 156 back in 1966. In it, Robert Reed fell into a cavern and found the dial. He then used it to transform into various superheroes, and they would change. He wasn't always the same one. And it wasn't until the 80s that it would come into play with existing heroes. Although, there was Plastic Man was a thing back in the day. Also, other people could use the dial, it wasn't key to one person or anything. The 80s series also had the added aspect that fans could submit their own heroes and villains, and would get credit and a t-shirt. Over time, the series has evolved into an examination of what it means to be a hero, and how finding the dial impacts people's lives. Spoilers, it's not always for good. The dial is pretty random with what hero you become, but that's part of the fun. It's the mystery box superhero power generator. I was gonna say loot box, but you don't have to pay for it. Ayo. Well, I mean not with money, but emotionally, oh yes, you pay.
Up next at number 9, Gwenpool. When Gwenpool first hit the scene in 2015, she was a huge success, becoming instantly beloved amongst fans after merely appearing on the cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. Here is the thing though, many people mistaken her abilities as those of Deadpool's, with her being assumed to be a female version of Wade Wilson. Gwenpool's name may have hilarious relations to Deadpool's thanks to a goof up from her dry cleaner, and the fact that her last name is Poole, spelled P-O-O-L-E. That was something that was retconned after her first appearance, might I add. So if she doesn't share Deadpool's powers, what exactly can she do? Well, she is a brilliant tactician, has vast knowledge of the Marvel Universe, claiming that she is from a timeline in which she read the comics and is now actually a part of them, plus she breaks the fourth wall like it is nobody's business. She knows her way around a whole lot of weapons, is capable of interdimensional travel, and has a regenerative healing factor, which yes, Deadpool has too, but they're very, very different characters, people. Very different.
Number 8, you got Hercules. You know, kind of an old sort of guy, you know what I mean? Debuting in Avengers number 10, 1964. Now, he was originally simply a minion of Immortus, and he belongs to the Olympian species. Like most, just like Hercules himself, he's got super strength, speed, and stamina. Known to be the strongest of all the Olympians, he could actually apparently pick up a sequoia tree, smash it to bits. It's also originally believed that he even moved the island of Manhattan. However, that was a little too much for comic book writers, and they were pretty much like, nah, he was just bluffing, he was just saying, tune the talk, you know what I mean? It wasn't true at all. Ooh. On top of that, he can go 100 miles per hour and go toe to toe with Thor, and can withstand, you know, the impacts from bullets. He's kind of another Superman if you really think about it, but his mace itself is kind of like the mace version of Thor's hammer. Thing is, he's backed up by Olympian magic, so nothing like even diseases can hurt him. However, if Zeus takes away his powers, he's pretty much useless. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if Rogue touched him.
In at 7, The Impossible Man. The Impossible Man hails from Marvel Comics, first appearing in Fantastic Four issue 11 from 1963. He is an alien character from the planet Pop-Up, which yes is a great name, and he has shape-shifting abilities. Plus he was typically used for comedic relief, portrayed as a lonely, attention-seeking extraterrestrial who annoyed the crap out of the Fantastic Four. In addition to his shape-shifting and mimicry abilities, he could also teleport and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Earth culture. So if that description is so straightforward, how did he end up getting on this list? Well, it's because of how the Impossible Man was depicted. His first appearance had him visiting Earth on vacation and assuming that he was the most powerful being on Earth after meeting the Fantastic Four. And then the story consisted of him harassing the team of heroes, wanting to start up an Earth pop-up travel agency. His earlier depictions gave him unlimited shape-shifting powers via molecular rearrangement, but due to his use as a comedic character, the extent of his abilities often fell into befuddling territory, and the full scale of his powers became questionable, since he was also able to mimic the likes of Thor and Wolverine. All in all, looks really funny, doesn't seem like much of a threat, kind of questionable as to what exactly his shape-shifting abilities can do. We know he can, but overall, very baffling.
Number 6. Zatanna. Now you may be thinking, are you both okay? Everyone understands Zatanna, a magician, she speaks backwards, but what some people miss out on is the scale of her powers. Zatanna is actually one of the most powerful sorceresses on Earth, and her powers appear to be inherited. What people tend to misuse or not remember is that her magic increases if not used. So if she doesn't use her magic, it builds to a critical point, which can cause an incident. This is why she releases it in such a controlled manner. However, if she uses too much, she depletes her powers, so she has to find a balance. She can also do spells spoken forward and has done so on rare occasions, and she can also do blood magic. Also, the limits of her powers are not fully defined. So have we seen the ceiling? We don't know. She's dangerous. Don't be fooled just because you could temporarily stop her with some duct tape.
Moving on to number 5, Ink. Our next baffling character is a Marvel creation who first appeared in Young X-Men issue 1 from 2008, and his powers are his tattoos. Yes, no joke, this fellow, whose real name is Eric Gitter, gets all of his abilities from his tattoos, his body ink, and has no actual superpowers of his own. Ink has access to a mutant tattoo artist who gave superpowers to individuals via his iconic power symbols that he would tattoo onto their skin. Now, Ink's tattoos consist of a biohazard symbol to make his foes extremely sick, a symbol that allows him to heal others, one that gives him super strength, wings on his back that grant him flight, a nuclear symbol in case he, wants to create a deadly nuclear explosion, a red cross on his neck that gives him self-healing powers, lightning bolts on his temples that lets him read minds, and 2 explosive symbols that allow him to blow up objects and punch through walls. But here's the real kicker, my friends. That tattoo artist, the mutant one, the one with the real abilities, he went into a catatonic state after giving Ink his last tattoo, which was the symbol for the Phoenix Force around his eye. All in all, Ink just kinda sucks. Can't really do anything, and he's just riffing off of this poor mutant tattoo artist, who he then put into a coma. So, yeah. Screw you, Ink. Up next, number 4, Zorn. Zorn is a confusing character to begin with. Is he his own dude? Is he Magneto? Does that mean Magneto can do a bunch of other stuff like manipulate gravity and turn his sun head into a black hole? Lots of questions, friends. So, for starters, Zorn is a dude who first showed up in New X-Men Annual 2001 as a Chinese mutant who had a star for a brain. That's why he wears his little helmet. He ended up becoming the subject of an incredibly confusing retcon, in which he was revealed to be Magneto, who had actually died in the Planet X storyline prior. It made little sense. Then it was revealed in Excalibur Volume 3 Issue 1 that Magneto never died at all, which meant Zorn wasn't actually Magneto, and that led to a whole confusing storyline that featured Zorn's brother, who was kinda like his twin, and overall it was just a big mess. Now that could largely be the reason why so many fans find Zorn and his abilities perplexing. But even when Zorn was revealed not to be Magneto after all, his brother shared very similar powers to him, and was technically the second Zorn, and there were a bunch of major differences. Rather than having a sun in his head that his helmet covered, his brother had a black hole there. I mean, similar but very, very different things. The original Zorn also had healing powers, electricity and magnetism generation and manipulation, the ability to teleport via time-space wormholes, gravity manipulation, telepathy, and was self-sustaining. So yeah, that's a whole lot of powers to cram into one dude who may or may not be Magneto, but probably wasn't. Baffling. Moving on to number 3, the Negative Man. The Negative Man is a character that first debuted in 1963, a DC creation who has eluded fans for years. I mean, it kinda makes sense as to why he's a member of the Doom Patrol. Negative Man, aka Larry Traynor, is an individual who was accidentally exposed to a radioactive field in the atmosphere while piloting a test plane. This gave him an interesting set of powers. Not only was he now radioactive, but he had the ability to release negatively charged energy from his body, referred to as the negative spirit or his soul self. Now this soul self is intangible, capable of flight, it can generate minor explosions when it comes into contact with positive energy, and it also acts as a means of temporal astral projection. It's visually represented as a shadowy silhouette of a human being. The downside? Well, Larry's body is physically defenseless when he is separated from it, so he only uses this ability 60 seconds at a time in order to avoid risking death. Now because of his radioactive nature, he wears special bandages that protect those around him, making him look a whole hell of a lot like the Invisible Man, something that can be slightly confusing to those unfamiliar with his character or the Doom Patrol upon first glance. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ends up on this list.
Number 2. Pure Heart. This is Archie Andrews, from that time when Archie was a superhero. Archie comics do what they want, and in 2019 they brought this series back again. So when Archie is Pure Heart, his powers depend on his pH factor, or his pure heart factor, so he can only access his powers if he has a pure heart, hence his name, Pure Heart the Powerful. Here's the thing, he can lose his powers really easily, just one impure thought. So feeling jealous? Boom, powerless. Accept a gift or kiss from a grateful rescuee? Boom, no powers. I hope they don't do it mid-flight, cause then, well, they're both dead.
And finally, in our number 1 spot, Phantom X. First appearing in New X-Men issue 128 from 2000, Phantom X was a character created by the Weapon Plus program to act as a super sentinel against mutants. He's a very convoluted, complex character. So, Mutant Plus does this. They use a process that uses techno-organic organisms whose living tissue is then fused with Sentinel nanotech on a cellular level. Phantom X is birthed from a woman who underwent that process. His mama went through that and he was raised in a place called the World, a man-made environment for these super sentinels. All in all, it is very absurd and peculiar, as are his powers. His nervous system is referred to as something called Eva. This nervous system can come out of his body, yes, like outside of his physical being, and it develops into a techno-organic flying saucer of sorts that he then has a symbiotic relationship with. When Eva is separated from him and in pain, he feels pain. But when he is attacked or someone or something has inflicted damage onto him, he feels nothing, no pain at all, and can ignore those injuries. Phantom X can also see through Eva's point of view, and can control her movement and reshape her form, or body if you will, if he concentrates enough. If that wasn't perplexing enough, Phantom X has microtechnology laced into his blood, which have some eerie effects, prohibiting him from things like believing in anything greater than himself, like gods or supernatural beings or the concept of love. He also can't see colors, which, I mean, in comparison to all the other stuff, is probably not that big of a deal. Dogs can't see colors, so. He can self-heal, and he can alter his body to increase his strength or hearing range. He can also enter a trance in order to perform crucial tasks, such as perform surgery on his own body. All in all, he is a curious character to say the least. And to not entirely understand what he does, I mean, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable.